This is Justin Norndorf of Baseball Rebellion, and I'll be taking a look at Brandon Beachy. Brandon Beachy is a guy last summer who underwent Tommy John surgery, and on his road back to recovery, in 5 starts back with Atlanta this year, he's now landed back on the DL with elbow soreness. Now, he's a guy that resembles the up, down, and out pattern, which I've talked frequently about, which is so prevalent at the major league levels and trickles down to the youth level. But I honestly feel, after watching Beachy play catch warm up at a rehab start here in Durham, that he's definitely athletic enough to make some more efficient movements into his movement pattern of his delivery and potentially allow his body to undergo less stress and hopefully keep him off the DL. And in order to do this, the first thing I would advise Beachy or the Braves to do is just teach him or show him a better way to move into the throw. And I'm using Whitey Ford here as an example of a real efficient movement that allows him to move together into the throw. And if we're going to start here with Beachy on the left, and you can see that as he kind of moves into his delivery, it's very basic with a small step. There he moves up into the left. There's no movement forward. Here's a gathering point. Everything comes to a stop. Very, very characteristic of up, down, and out. And the point I want to make here is we're just going to look at how much lower body movement and how much mass he actually moves forward. So we're going to key on the front hip here. And there is a circle. And as he starts to move, I like to get to the point to when the front foot gets back in line with the hip and starts to get out in front of the body. Okay? And so here would be the other circle. And that's really just not much movement at all. And so let's go over and do the same exact thing with Whitey Ford here. So we go with Ford's movement, and we're going to go back. There's his lead hip. And let's go to the point to when his toe, his foot gets out there. Okay? And you can see the difference in that line. But more importantly, what happens when the body lower half and the hips are moving forward? As you can see, as Whitey's getting the hips out in front of his body, his head instantly goes behind the back hip, which allows him to create and keep his torso back and maintain leverage into the throw. So he's delaying his trunk rotation and allowing his lower half to just work out in front of his body. So he's creating this bow and arrow effect. With Beachy, his front foot gets out very early, which is going to signal to his body, I got to start throwing sooner than you need to. And what happens is this all makes the big difference here as when he's starting to accelerate into the throw. Okay? So because Beachy doesn't use his lower half properly, his spine and his head are going to get out in front of his body sooner than they need to. So here at front foot strike, we can see that this would be the position of Beachy, his shoulders, and his spine. Okay? So very upright, very centered, shoulders are level. And a lot of people would teach this position, and this is probably why he does it. Okay? But his elbow is getting a little bit higher than his shoulder as his front foot hips. And as a comparison, I want you to see Whitey Ford. So there's where his front foot hits. Okay? Here's his spine angle, still slightly backwards. If we go shoulder to shoulder, slightly upward angle as he's moving into his throw. Okay? So again, this has everything to do with how these two guys got to this position. And because the torso delayed, when Whitey starts to go into his rotation, his trunk, his mass can move into the throw together. Okay? And because it moves together, that means when his trunk starts to rotate, his arm is going to rotate with it. And there's where the ball comes out. Now I want you to really look at this position compared to when Beachy rotates. You can see because his torso, his head, his spine has already gotten forward, he starts to collapse back into his body. So if you look at his front knee here, it starts to stiffen, and what happens is his elbow gets jutted out in front of his body earlier than it needs to, and his spine and trunk rotation stop, which is just slamming the elbow forward into the throw. Okay, so here's where he releases the baseball compared to when Whitey Ford releases the baseball. And you can just see how much further the trunk and spine are out in front of the body compared to Beachy. It's very dramatic, and this has everything to do with the deceleration of the throw, the arms being supported as the trunk rotates back into the body. Okay, so a lot of Beachy's problems exist with how he starts his movement and then what ends up happening because the body has to rotate a certain way. So this is the extent of the finish of Beachy. Very tall, very upright, and you can see his arm slams out in front and comes back in, and the shoulder here, the scabs have to do a lot more work to slow this arm down compared to Ford over here. Well, you can't quite see his full finish, but we can assume because his chest and his spine are so far out that his trunk is already out in front, and it's going to continue to rotate back into the body. Okay, but again, just to reinforce my point, it's all about how you get there. So if Beachy were able to incorporate slightly more hips and get his hips out in front of his body earlier and keep his head behind this back hip. So if we look at Whitey, keep his head behind the hip, or even for him in line with the hip longer and allow his lower half to keep working, I feel like he would be much more stable, much more efficient, and hopefully take stress off that elbow and keep him off the DL. This is Justin Orndorff with Baseball Rebellion. Thanks for listening.